Hi, and welcome to our webinar on Visioneering Deliberations. Today we're going to discuss ministry design process, and we're going to deal with the first of these four processes or phases in the ministry design process. Discovery, where we're going to talk about vision, and we've talked about several things in preparation for discussion on vision. One is to identify your core values, that is the things that are essential and non-negotiable for you and your ministry. And then your mission, as you flesh out the Great Commission, how does God and what does God want you to do to further His kingdom? And then vision. Built on top of vision is your strategic plan. We have talked about several things about vision thus far. One is the definition of vision, the description of vision, the distinctions, what it is and what it is not, the differences and comparisons to other parts of the ministry design process, the derivatives, what benefits and rewards are you going to get from going through the visioneering process. In other words, what will vision do for your ministry? And then the director or directors of the visioneering process. Somebody's got to lead it. And then we dealt recently with the discovery of vision. Every church, every individual, God has a unique vision for them. And the discussion today on the deliberations of discovering your vision, it couples with the process we took you through in dealing with discovering God's unique vision for your ministry. And so we want you to understand that there has to be some investment of yourself in order for you to discover God's vision. He wants to give it to people, or the scriptures show us that He'll give it to people who are ready and willing to pursue it. And I'm not saying there won't be some difficulties like there was with Moses, who God spoke to plainly, directly. Most of us probably will have God speak to us indirectly through others or through something we've read or an experience we have or a synthesis of all those things together. That was a part of our webinar on the discovery of God's vision for your ministry. The discovery part dealt with a process, and I explained it through the conception of a seed thought to a fertile mind and heart that is ready to receive it, to that of the development. Think of an embryo being developed in your wife's body, that she has conceived with a child, and she now has an embryo that is developing and growing so it can be delivered. And there comes a birthing. And so we talk about the conception and the development of the embryo, and then the birthing of that idea into a child. And so with today, we want you to deliberate about several things. There are things that you need to know, to master your understanding, and to get God's wisdom in certain areas. And so we're going to go through those right now. What are the areas that you need to know? Knowledge, not just head knowledge, but an experiential knowledge of several things. And the first one is that you need to pursue your Creator, to know Him. Well, how are you going to go about doing that? The Bible teaches us that we are to examine His Word. And so now, let me just give this to you. George Barna, in his book on the power of vision, talks about visionary Christian leaders have made it plain through the ages that you cannot know God's vision for your ministry unless you first know God. And where do we learn about God? Well, we learn it from the scriptures. And so let me tell you what I constantly find. And that is, number one, we seem to, at least I get to where I'm mechanically studying the Word, and I have a system for producing messages, sermons that I am preaching and teaching, and even my counseling process. I have a process I go through in order to produce that work, because I'm always under a time constraint. When I was a senior pastor, I was preaching 3 to 5 times a week, and then had multiple counseling times, and so I learned to do it. Well, here's what I find, and I believe you'll agree with me. It, I became desensitized to the personal absorbing of the information, and so I want you to personalize your study and ask God to illuminate your mind as to who He is. And so it's not just a resource for building your sermons and counseling notes. Treat it as the resource that unlocks the very mysteries of who God is and His nature, the fullness of His ideas and future for mankind, and the wisdom of His methods in producing that, so that you understand the God behind His redemptive passion. You want to get to the very heart, and it's a personal relationship that is a spiritual journey, you and God. So it's a personalized study, not just for your congregation, but for your own heart and life. God's trying to do something in you. I've said this before, and it's not original with me. The bottleneck is usually at the top of the bottle. So, Pastor, if you're not spiritually disciplined to pursue God, to know Him intimately, personally, and He illuminates your mind and heart with the fullness of His person, it's going to hinder your ability to discern, to discover His vision for your work. So I agree, don't think that God's going to share His vision with you for your ministry unless you first pursue Him. And so where do we get that? Well, we study the Word. So we work to understand how God has used and worked with other people with their limited talent, treasures, and intellect, and it helps me to know how God did that so I can look to see how God works in His methods. You may then be able to identify how God is trying to work in your own life. So study God's relationship with other people in Scripture. How did He work with them? And look for God to work with you in similar ways. What you're trying to do is understand who God is. You want to know Him personally, not just academically, doctrinally and theologically, and then even your own ability to communicate truth, biblical truth. But you're looking for God to illuminate and open your mind as to who He is, to get an understanding of God in His character, characteristics, His conduct, how He thinks. How does God think? Well, if you get to know Him well enough, you're going to know how He thinks, and it's going to help you determine what He'd have you to do. It's all a part of discovering the vision, is to examine the Word. So we study and become a student of visioneering. We identify God's character and characteristics to help us determine if a vision idea is consistent with Him. How do you think people catch folks who plagiarize? Well, if they know the person who wrote it and they know the character, they can tie what was written or spoken or drawn, artistic work, to the Creator. Well, God's not going to direct you in conflict with His person or His Word, His commandments. He has a way of doing things. Learn them. Let God purify your motives with the washing of the Word. Learn to relate to God. And so this comes to where, we're looking at examining the Word so that we can understand Him. It's relational. It's experiential. It is personal and intimate. Next, evaluate your prayer life. May I suggest to you that you not just use your prayer life as a request hotline. God, I need this. Help. And I understand. I'm there. Where I go and I ask God like I was writing down a grocery list. Lord, pray for my wife's health and my son's success and their spiritual life, and would you give me money, and would you give me, ministry, and would you give me, and so we go on, and it's just like a spiritual hotline that we're doing. It's just one request after another. So what do you need to do instead of your prayer life being predominantly characterized as request-driven? Ask, 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 give me, give me, give me. What does it need to be? Well, I think you need to make yourself available to Him. If you want to understand be able to discern and discover God's vision and the plan he has for you to carry out that vision and the whole visioneering process, you better discipline yourself by making yourself available to him, to listen to him. All too often, I'm like Samuel. God comes and speaks to me 3 times in the night, and I'm thinking it's Eli speaking to me. Until suddenly I realize it's God speaking to me. So when he wakes you up in the middle of the night, realize it's God wanting you to talk with him. So you want to gain his perspective. You want to ask him to speak to you, then you're going to listen. You're going to focus in on him. You're going to sit and be still and patient and wait on him. And you're going to let God be in control. You're going to fight the urge to be busy. Do you sometimes feel like I do, that I'm not really successful, fulfilled, or happy unless I'm active? Well, prayer life is where you can sit, and folks, it doesn't have to be just in an isolated place in your home or at your office. That you need to be in a constant mode of talking with him. But at some point, you've got to be still in your soul and quiet the busyness and the chatter that is going on in your soul, because we all have deadlines, we've all got duties and responsibilities and demands on us. Stop and listen to him. Turn off the car radio. Shut down the text on your phone. Turn off the TV. Go sit out in your backyard or someplace where you can get alone and just sit there. Meditate on the scripture. Worship the Lord. Praise his name. Go through his characteristics. Chew on something where you've been studying the word, and wait for God. Develop a loving relationship with your Lord. That's what I'm saying. Here's the third thing that I don't like to do, and you may not either. I would find it surprising that it comes naturally for us just to fast. But you might try exercising fasting, where you're focused on God and not on anything else, and let God use that in your life. And wait on God. Spiritual discipline demands that we study the Word, that we develop our prayer life and listen and wait on God, and that we practice fasting. That's the first of a number of things that God wants us to do and know. He wants us to know him personally, intimately, how he works, who he is. Gentlemen, our wives probably study us much more than we study them. I realize that that's maybe a hasty generalization, but your wife probably studies you. She can look at your eyes, your facial expression, all your nonverbals, your voice inflection when you open your mouth, and she can tell what's going on with you. Are you a student of her? The Bible tells us as the husbands to study our wives, to love our wives, to focus on them. Now, are you focused on God? You need to be, and develop your understanding of him so you can hear him. Instead of being a Samuel who takes 3 times to hear God as he speaks to you, be ready and willing and waiting to hear him. I want you to study your context. If you're going to identify and discern God's vision for your life and ministry, you got to pay attention to your context. God is going to use it to help you. So let's just go through some of these areas. Here's the first one, your cores. Sorry, I couldn't think of another word that would be a C word, but your cores. So you need to, first of all, understand yourself. So let me ask you, do you understand your spiritual gifts? Have you identified them? Have you taken a test maybe from placeministries.org or assessme.org or any number of the authors that I refer to that are on our website, like Aubrey Malphurs? He has some spiritual inventory. Elmer Towns has another one. They're free. You can go and take them. You can pay assessme and placeministries.org, but you can discover. Rick Warren wrote years ago about shape. Spiritual gifts is the S in shape. It's an acronym. Heart or passion. Abilities, your talents, both natural talents and nurtured talents. Your personality type. You can order a DISC profile from any number of companies online. Just Google personality DISC profile or just DISC, D-I-S-C profile. And excuse me, a number of options will pop up. At least it does when I do it. And you'll be able to choose from any number of companies and spend, $10 to $20, take a 30-minute, 15-minute, 45-minute, depending on the company, and answer a bunch of questions. They're just questions they're asking, and from it they will spit out a DISC profile of you as a person. The D stands for dominant. The I stands for influential. The S stands for steadfastness. And the C stands for compliance. And they will give you a ratio by percentages. If you are high in the D and low in the C, which is not unusual, or you're high in the I and mid-range on the D, and maybe 0.25% on the C and the S, it will break it down. And from that study, you can read any number of other books to help you with your personality type and then experience. So let me just give you, and all of this I'm going to make available with this webinar, so it'll be on the website. The resource and the documentation and the resources are there, and the links on our website will take you to the book, so you can buy it on Amazon. You can buy a book called Emotional Intelligence 2.0 and take a survey there along with Strength Finders 2.0. That in the back of that book is a disc. You plug it in. It gives you a password. They're set up for you to be able to identify, to discover your personality type and your emotional intelligence and your strengths as a leader. The book written by the same guy that wrote Strength Finder 2.0, Tom Rath and Barry Conchi. Strengths-Based Leadership. That's another book that's there. Eric Ries wrote a book on shape from Rick Warren's writing about shape. Finding and Fulfilling Your Unique Purpose for Life. Rick Warren's book on the purpose-driven life is another one. And so from these guys are writing books, Strength Finder 2.0, Strengths-Based Leadership, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, Shape, Living Your Strengths by Wiseman, Clifton, and Leesfield. Those three guys are PhDs and guys with Master of Divinity degrees that wrote on living your strengths. And then you've got other books like by Dan Miller, No More Mondays, helping guys determine where they belong. Because here's what's going to happen. A percentage of the folks who take this that I am saying, and they begin to examine, to understand themselves, are going to realize that they are not either senior pastor, lead pastor material. That's not that God's place for them in His economy, or you're not a leader. You're really a follower. And so as you begin to do this, if I can help more pastors find their own place in God's economy, how they work, because if you understand your strengths, your gifts, and your passions, your abilities, your personality type, and your experience, it should serve to help you assemble a team of people who will work with you and fit together. So you build a team. It's not finding the best people who are the greatest at what they do. It is finding the right people who are the best fit for your team. And so you're putting together a team like you would a football team, a soccer team, a baseball team, a hockey team. Pick your sport. Or a debate team if you want to go to forensics. And you're looking at putting together so that you have a strong group together. My wife and I watched this morning as we were walking at 5:30, a flock of geese come over, and they were in their V formation, and they were squawking loud as they could be, but they're organized, and they're working together. Well, think of that, of organizing and working together a team in every aspect and every part of your ministry, from your leadership of the overall church to the individual teams that make up the leadership teams of your individual ministries in your church. And so you're looking, first of all, you need to understand yourself and how you do so you can lead others to understand this. So as you go through this, let me just give you some questions. Let's just review some questions in some areas, and I'll put this together for you on site, so I'm not going to go through all of them. But do you understand your emotional intelligence? You know, what turns you on emotionally? What turns you off emotionally? During what situations do you feel most alive or exuberant? Which Bible persons or figures capture your imagination, and why? What makes life worth living for you? So on and on, there's questions for you to answer as you start answering these to begin peeling back the onion of who you are. And that's really what these tools are doing. Questions about your abilities. What are your spiritual gifts? What goals have you set and reached during the past 5 years? What goals have you set and failed at during the last 5 years? What kept you from meeting your goals? What goals are you afraid to set because you feel incapable of reaching them? How has God made you different than others? What about questions about your perspectives? How would you define a successful church? What would it take for your church to be successful? This is getting into your theology of church and culture and code and change, church and so forth. Here's another set. What questions about your heart, your passions? What brings you to tears? If you could accomplish any one task in life, what would it be? If your friends and family remembered only one thing about you after you died, what would you want them to remember? For what cause would you be willing to suffer physical persecution, abuse emotionally and intellectually, mentally? What portions of Scripture speak the loudest to you? On and on you go as you look at your passions. Are your desires, where you're full of idolatry, you've misplaced God-given desires to the wrong things, or are you being godly with your desires? Now, if you're a man listening to me, the lust for a woman, for sex, and on you go. Questions about your ministry, questions about your mentors and models. We'll try and make up a worksheet for you to go through and ask. These won't be original with me, by the way. It's others that have done it. Where I'm reading to you right now is just from George Barna's work, the book, The Power of Vision. He just gives a list there, but any number of authors can put this together for you. So I'll just try and summarize them so that you can have a tool and you use them for yourself, then you use them for others as well. Well, you need to understand your core leadership, your pastoral staff, and your lay leadership. So as you go back through here and you look at your shape, now lead your key leaders through this. What are their strengths and weaknesses? Where is their emotional intelligence, intellectual intelligence, their personality profile? What is their place and purpose in your ministry? What motivates them? And let's get down to it, why do you do ministry? Is it because of you want power or prestige or position or maybe personal acceptance? Let me encourage you to avoid self-deception by honestly evaluating your place in God's economy. You need to identify your core values. What are the things that are most important to you? Go back and listen to the webinars we did on core values. We did 4 of them. What about your attitudes? Or your assumptions? Your experiences? Or your passions? What do you yearn for? What excites you in ministry? What occupies your thoughts? And when you honestly take and write down your theology of church, culture, and change, what do you get? What's the church? Define it. What's its purpose? What is your posture toward culture? Do you believe you ought to be in it but not of it? Do you believe you ought to attract them to your church, or you go get them? What's your posture toward lost people? What is your posture toward the culture that you live in, whether it be good or bad, godly or ungodly? And then what is your theology of change? You have to identify what's essential and non-essential, what is negotiable and non-negotiable. And what do you think is the biblical process for leading change in your own life and in your church's life? In understanding your core leadership, you need to study them. They ought to be your friends, but you ought to be a student of your congregation. You ought to study them and understand and be able to answer this. So use, and I'll put it on the website, placeministries.org, assessme.org. Recommend the books that I've mentioned to you, and take what you've done for yourself and work to do this for your church family. You not only need to pursue God, you need to really study your context so that you understand the leadership in your church, yourself and the other leaders in your church. And then you need to understand your congregation, their history. Someone kept up with it. Maybe you've come to this church, you've been there 3 years. How much do you know about the motivation for starting the church? Where did it come from? Who is there? How have they thought? Their history has a lot to say about some things. Their shape. You ever thought about going and asking not only your key leadership, but your key laypersons, to take a Place Ministries test and to look at their shape? So what would you say is the whole shape of your congregation? Their spiritual gifts. What is your congregation's spiritual gifts? When you summarize it, do you see one or two or three key gifts that God has given to your congregation? And then their passion. Are they just really eager and excited to invest themselves in a certain way? You can tell that by looking at the activities that are attended. You can look and see where they spend their time and what they talk about. You need to be listening to them just like you're listening to God, so that you can understand their abilities, both natural and nurtured, their personality types. You know, if you learn that, it will certainly help you put your teams together so they're not fighting among themselves and having to work around the fact that they don't fit together. And then their experiences. So when you look at the history of the congregation, what shape do you see to the present day? And then when you look at the present day, what shape do you see? What about the demographics? Demographics deals with their income, married or single, children or not, own their own home or not, just basic mechanical things, where they go to school. And then you step into psychographics, which is dealing with their lifestyle, their attitudes, their perspectives. You know, we got an election coming up here. How do they vote? Excuse me. And so when you begin to examine this, their lifestyles, their attitudes, how they think, you're dealing with more than just their demographics, the mechanics of who they are. But now you're dealing with how they think, their mental makeup. And then you want to look at their core values. Again, if you haven't taken this webinar and discovered this first, remember I showed you the paragraph at the start of this that you had at the foundation of the pyramid. You had the foundation of core values. You need to understand what's important to them, or you're going to mess up when it comes to understanding their code. Their code, think of your congregation as a body of believers. Well, think of them as a body. And it's got a DNA, genetic makeup, okay? And so they're made up, and that makes up their code, their genetic code. And all these aspects are a part of that code. Their culture, their core values, the mission, how they're they're led to fulfill the Great Commission, their history, their shape, their demographics and psychographics, all that's making up code. So my wife and I have 2 sons. If one of our boys needed a kidney transplant, my wife and I might be a match for them. But they'd have to go through and test Pam and I, and they'd have to test our son that needed the kidney transplant. What you don't want is to transfer a kidney and the body rejects it. The body rejects it. You need to understand the very essence of who your church is at their very core. And these things are a part of making up who they are, their persona, their essence at their core. So you know how to lead them in discovering God's vision for their ministry. Understanding your congregations means you pursue to learn about their code, the very core of who they are, their culture. One of my friends pastored in New England years ago, and he said, I came to the church, and he had been out west, great guy, comes in to pastor this New England church, and he noticed all the men, all they ever wore to church were dark suits, dark ties, and white shirts, and dark black wingtip shoes. They didn't vary off of that. That's what they wore. I guess it must have looked like an Undertaker's church, but, they were dark blue. I'm being silly, but dark blue, black, dark suits, okay? He had suits that were brown and blue and all these different things, and wild-colored ties and different colored shirts and pinstripes and plaids and all this stuff. And he said, I'm standing there in the pulpit looking out at the congregation, and I don't look anything like them. The light bulb was coming on in his mind. Culturally, they were set up in a certain way. Well, you need to understand their culture. You need to understand their causes. What motivates them? What do they feel is the purpose for their church involved? I know it's to honor God in all they do, whatsoever you eat or drink. I'm talking about what they believe is the cause or the causes for their church. They want to be involved in the cause of Christ. What does that look like? What is it? Or what are those causes? That you need to study it, because I doubt that the vision is going to be in conflict with your mission, with your understood key mission or cause. Now, you need to understand the view of your congregation of their place in God's economy, past, present, and future. If you were to grade yourself right now, would you get 100 when it comes to understanding and knowing God, and understanding yourself and your staff and your lay leaders, and understanding and knowing the characteristics and the character and the conduct and the creed of your congregation? If not, you need to become a student of people. Here's another area, your community. Again, we're back to the demographics and the psychographics, and then eclographics. Now, eclographics, called out ecclesia, when you stop to consider the eclographics of your community, what churches are there, how do they look, who attends those churches, which churches are doing well at reaching the community, everything about them. And we'll get in a moment to studying more about the churches in your community. But eclographics, placeministries.org, when you order some of their research, and that's the demographics and psychographics, perceptgroup.org, or missioninsight.org. Both those companies will give you, and I'll put it on the website so you'll have access to it, demographics, psychographics, and perceptgroup.org will give you eclographics, show you what churches in the area and their names and all. But as you begin to study it, I've been coaching a church planter who is in New England for some time, and he's planted the church a year ago. They just had their 1-year anniversary, 1-year first birthday. And one of the things he and his wife did for 5-6 months before they really got started was they visited every church in their area, trying to get a grasp on the eclographics. I would tell any church planter to do that as a general rule. So as you look at understanding your community, what patterns do you see? What problems stand out to you? What kind of people are there? Problem people? Elite people? Influential people? To understand it, by the way, you might go talk to some key people. What about talking to the police chief? What about talking to school superintendents and school principals and the teachers? What about politicians and judges? What about civil servants and key influencers in your community? just to get their perspective and help you understand what they are seeing about the patterns and the problems of your community. Because you may get a vision by just looking at that, the patterns and the problems of your community. So as you look at this, you ought to give some personal pursuit to know them. So here's my challenge to you. Don't rely just on the demographics and psychographics that you can purchase from percetgroup.org or from Mission Insight, and they're very helpful. Or and I've got documents I'll put here, but there's any number of sources where you can learn about the demographics, psychographics, and ecographics of your community that are free. city-data.org or .com will give you more information than you want to read. 100 pages on a county or city. And it's free. At least it is at the date of this, as I do this webinar. But there is no substitute for your personal pursuit to know your community. Didn't God call you to reach them, to preach the gospel to them, to confront them? Didn't he tell you that you were supposed to perform and carry out the great commandment, to love your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself? Well, you need to know them. A key component to discerning God's vision for your ministry is knowing your community, because your vision is going to first be carried out probably right there in your community. Then let me go to another area, and that is your colleagues. When I say this, I'm talking about other pastors and ministry leaders in your area of churches or parachurch organization. And you want to, if you can, look at their shape and how they're put together. And that comes to the second one, is looking at the churches, so that you understand your colleagues and you understand your sister churches. Whether you agree with them theologically and doctrinally or in any of it, or whether you feel very closely knit to them, they're similar or greatly different from you. That you stop and look at the churches in your area to look at their shape and their ministry design. And when I say ministry design, it's different than shape. We are dealing with, and we're doing one right now, this webinar is on ministry design process on visioneering deliberations. So you're contemplating and studying to know something. You're being deliberate in learning about these areas. So you look at your ministry design, I am talking about that church's values, mission, vision, and game plan. And when you begin to talk to those pastors and study them and how they're shaped by God and their place in God's economy, and then you look at their church and their shape and their code and their core and their culture and how they're put together and God has shaped them, and you look at their ministry design to understand their target audience and their methodologies and their ministries, that you ought to master those things so you know about them. Because you may find that you blend very well with them, or that you're filling a gap or a hole in the community, in your area, that needs to be filled. And so you look at the target audience they have and their methodologies and their ministries in order to understand that. And then we go to the next one, in competition. Now, you may have already guessed that I'm not talking about other churches in your area. I'm talking about competition, things that would keep a lost person from coming to Christ, that are their passions and their focus. It's probably not the other churches in your area. It is entertainment is one that is common. Television, the internet, sports, other interest, where they're so busy and focused and captivated by other things other than God that you're trying to approach them with their need of Christ, with the gospel, and you're trying to build relationship, build bridges to them, both individually and as a church, and you've been called as you go, the Great Commission, to give them the gospel. And so as you identify this, what's keeping them? What's competing with you on Sunday morning, during the week? What's competing with you? And you might be able to identify some things. that will help you gain a vision, God's vision, for how you would reach them. It might be their occupation. It keeps them so busy, and they're pursuing power and prestige and all these different things, money, that they're wanting the preeminence, and they've made themselves God. So there's idolatries that are competing with your church and with you as a leader to win these people to Christ. So what are the escape routes? They're captured by the competition. Not other churches. Something else is occupying them, entertaining them, has become an idol in their minds and hearts. So what are the escape routes? God may give you some vision about how to help these people escape, but you've got to connect with them. They've got to hear you. They can't be glazed over, or you don't think that you have anything relevant to say. You have to earn an audience with them. So what are the escape routes? Do you see any? Well, you ought to learn what they are and form some opinions about it. And you'll do that by talking to your colleagues and to leaders of other churches and looking at what's worked and hasn't worked, or what is working, and begin to formulate and synthesize all of this stuff together. A visionary leader deliberates and synthesizes all the information, waiting for God to put a seed thought in his head. And this is a part of God using your understanding of the competition, the churches in your area, your colleagues who are leading those churches, your community, your own congregation, your own group of leaders, your core group of leaders that are there leading you, your understanding of God and his word, so that you can wait on God to begin putting and making clear what's his vision for your work, and start heading you into developing a thought that you think is going to grow into a vision, God's vision for your ministry. Then you want to listen to your colleagues, those counselors who were told in Scripture, in Proverbs 11:14, says, where there is no counsel, the people fall. One version says, the King James says, that people perish. But in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. So regardless of what translation you choose to use, go grab it, guys, and look at 3 or 4 and study the passage. But here we're told to listen to our counselors. Why? There is safety. When you go about to begin developing the seed thought to birth a vision, and it's something that other mentors or coaches or other pastors or those who've been helping to shape and mold your life, your spiritual mentors, let them look at it. Ask them their opinion. Proverbs 12:15, the way of a fool seems right to him, but a wise man listens to advice. So go ask for their advice. Give it to them in writing. Let them look at what you're thinking with your core values, your mission, and your vision, and let them give you some feedback on it. Because what you're looking for as they do this is accountability and accuracy. Does it look correct? Does it look complete? Does it look compatible? Does it fit your life and ministry? Does it fit your congregation? Does it fit your community? Does it meet any needs? Does it solve any problems? So here's the rule. We don't need to be knuckleheads when it comes to ignoring what is going on around us. We can't live in a cocoon. We've got to go study to know experientially our God and ourselves and those we work with and our congregation and our community. We've got to know our fellow workers and fellow churches, and ask God to use it to build us so that we can deliberately work with God in waiting on God to make plain and give discernment, his wisdom, about what his will is for your ministry. What's his vision? What's the destination? What does God see the potential of your ministry, your church? What does it look like down the road? Well, knowing that destination and that appearance in character and conduct and characteristics, in mission, in all its aspects, knowing that vision, God's vision for your work, gives you direction, helps you formulate a game plan, a strategic plan, so you can fulfill your mission through carrying out your mission based within the parameters of your core values, so that in all you do, you honor God. You glorify the name of Jesus. You uplift, and others get the right image of who he is by your life. You need to be deliberate, and there needs to be deliberations where you study, become a student in all these areas that we've mentioned. Well, I'm Marshall Shannon, your ministry design coach with Ministry Design Training, who has brought you this webinar. And Ministry Design Concepts is our company. You can reach me at this email address or at either one of these phone numbers. And I trust the Lord's blessing upon you as you pursue God and study yourself and all the other aspects we've mentioned, so you are ready to receive when God is ready to communicate his vision for your life and ministry, that you're ready to receive it.